My, that's a nice tattoo you've got there. Where did you get that done? The latest from podnews.net with the Dr. John Deloney Show. How much do your listeners want to promote your show? A Canadian politics show is paying people to get a tattoo of their podcast artwork. Kyle in Edmonton did it. You can find a picture and a video in a link that we posted in our newsletter and in our show notes. Red Circle has added a Host-Read script management tool to help save brands and agencies time and production costs. It can turn a single Host-Read script into a personalized script with vanity URL and promotion codes for each podcaster in the campaign. Chasing Sleep is a branded podcast for Mattress Firm, which is a US mattress firm. iHeartMedia reports data from Affinity Solutions saying that the podcast drove 4 times the ROI on ad spend, and customers who heard the podcast spent 45% more than customers who didn't. LiveOne's chairman and CEO Rob Ellin is interviewed later today in the Podcast Business Journal. Speaking about the planned acquisition of certain assets of Cast Media, he says, "We've spoken to every podcaster. We've offered a really fair deal," adding,
"We made it clear to them, you cannot move with a fistful of anger, right? You have to move over where you're truly in partnership with us, and all of us want to grow and build together and do something great together."
You can read the full interview in the Podcast Business Journal later at podcastbusinessjournal.com. Alex Cooper is to launch a new Gen Z podcast network called the Unwell Network in Canada. Sports media company Playmaker has purchased La Poche Bleue, which is a sports and entertainment brand in Quebec. Salem Media Group released its Q2 23 financial results. Podcasting isn't split out in the numbers. Digital grew 0.5% quarter on quarter and is responsible for 31.6% of revenues now. The company is taking a further round of cost cutting. And what better way to spend an evening in North London than in a community garden in Dalston, listening to creative and experimental audio from new producers. That's the promise of what's new from In the Dark and Transmission Roundhouse. In People News, Libsyn has announced a new chief financial officer. He's Chuck Cargyle and replaces Jonathan Charrock. And in podcast news, some folk don't want us to talk about some parts of our history. Redacted History looks at parts of our past that sometimes get brushed under the carpet. From Hawaii's last princess to the dark history of the Second Amendment, the stories of people that the textbooks forgot are in Redacted History. It's part of the Airwave podcast network, and we thank them for their support this month. The Skeptic Metaphysicians is celebrating, hitting 100,000 downloads in under a year. The show won 2 accolades at the Signal Awards last year and calls itself a fun exploration of metaphysics, spiritual awakenings, healing modalities, and magical personalities. And Let's Talk About Uni is a new podcast from all the different universities in Wales, aimed at giving young people in Wales a real insight about university life. It's new from Bengo Media. It's accompanied by a Welsh language series called Scorsio and Brifysgol. They're part of University Ready, a collection of free resources from universities in Wales, aiming to help students take their next step into higher education. This podcast is sponsored by the Dr. John Deloney Show. For practical advice on how to connect with people, face depression, overcome anxiety, and what it means to be well, find the Dr. John Deloney Show wherever you get your podcasts. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.